Remember, it's broadcast live via the County Council's website and archived so you can visit it later. Microphones on and off when speaking, please. Before we move on, can I formally thank Pam for the work she did for this Cabinet over a number of years, placed on the record, and welcome Lee, who is the new Pam. I'm sure he'll do just as good a job as Pam. And also it's worth noting, for those that haven't seen it, that the Prime Minister has formally resigned. Sad occasion, she looked very, very distressed. I mean, I know she's had a sticky wicket to bat on, but, you know, she's been a resolute woman, and I do actually feel sorry for her, but there you go. We move onwards and upwards, but I think it's worth us placing on record our thanks for the service that she's given the country. Okay, moving on then. So minutes, pages 3 to 12. I move that the minutes of the meeting held on 29th of March 2019 are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is that agreed? Yeah. Thank you very much. Urgent items, there are none. Declarations of interest, and I've got a note here that all members who are members of district councils to declare an interest in item 8, growth in Leicestershire. So I'm one of a member of a district council, so I'll declare. Anybody else? Have you got those down? Yeah. Great, thank you. Gerald's only a single hatter, and Byron Rhodes is now a single hatter. And Blake Payne's a single hatter. Trio of single hatters, yeah. Special educational needs and disabilities provision, results of consultation on the development of a new provision, high needs block development plan, 13 to 48. It concerned, well, I mean, it's pretty much what I've introduced, really. So I think Jane's going to introduce it, aren't you, Jane? And then Ivan will speak. And then if we've got any questions, you'll be able to answer them, won't you, Jane? Okay.
Thank you. Good morning. So this report sets out the outcome of the public consultation on the development of our local special educational needs and disability provision, and also the outcome of the publication of the statutory notice for the development of the new provisions, and also seeks agreement for the Director to determine the statutory notice and the shortlist of potential academy trusts to operate the new communication and interaction school in Barwell. So by way of a background, the report to Cabinet on the 18th of December set out the pressures in relation to the provision of pupils having special educational needs and the impact to the high needs block. And it in particular set out the impact of the projected increase in demand over the next 5 years to over 22%. And this increase in impact of an overspend arises particularly as a result of the increase in education, health and care plans, increases in the number of children post-16 who require support, and also an increase in the number of children accessing independent provision because there's insufficient local authority units. So the High Needs Development Plan set out plans for the development of new resource bases in our mainstream schools across Leicestershire, expanding our existing special schools, but also the development of a number of new free schools for communication and interaction issues, but also social, emotional and mental health. So we went out to consultation on the proposals for the new provision in January, and that consultation closed at the end of March. And the consultation involved writing to a wide group of individuals who had interest in the development of the new provision, including every single Leicestershire school and every parent and carer of a pupil having an education and health and care plan. And we've set out the detail of the responses in paragraphs 34 to 36. But in summary, analysis to the responses shows that there's very high levels of support to the proposals, with the majority indicating very strong support. In particular, those respondents favoured the shorter travel times to school, the opportunity to be educated in mainstream, the development of more localised specialist places, and the priority being given to the development of more SEND provision, and also opportunities for pupils with SEND to improve engagement with their local communities. There have been relatively few adverse comments made. So the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Commission will consider the consultation outcome and progress with the High Needs Development Plan at its next meeting at the beginning of June. So the publication of the statutory notice to change and maintain schools is in keeping with the Council's legal obligations, and we've set those out in paragraphs 43 and 44. So the statutory notice that details the planned changes to each of those individual schools was published on the 4th of April and followed a 28-day representation period which closed at the beginning of this month. We've had no objections received to the statutory notices. So, as agreed by Cabinet in March, the Director will determine the notice to allow those various SEND developments to go ahead. And just to note that whilst there have been no objections, we did have some more in-depth conversations with parents at Ibstock St Denny's, and that's now been resolved. In relation to academies, we are now progressing discussions with each of the individual academies, seeking to develop the provision and hope to get agreement through the Regional Schools Commissioner for those to progress in due course. And then just to end, the new proposed free school in Barwell works well in progress now to establish the 80-place provision. And the department launched the free school presumption process which started on the 11th of March. We've to date had 4 expressions of interest and a detailed evaluation of these expressions of interest is now underway. So following the detailed process, we will have a shortlist. And as there's no Cabinet meeting scheduled for July, and mindful that we do need a decision from the Regional Schools Commissioner, then members are asked to agree to allow the Director of Children and Family Services, in consultation with the lead member, to agree the shortlist of preferred academy trusts. Thank you.
Okay, Ivan.
Thank you, Leader. I'm going to move the motion on the Green Order paper. I would like to add some detail. The SEND board has parents as part of the board membership, and they are very clearly in agreement, particularly with the notice, that the ability to shorten travel times and to maintain children in their own communities. If you recall, that was one of the key parameters that we set out at the beginning, and it's very good that it's been confirmed through the consultation. I think the way the staff have handled this has been excellent. People have had full opportunity to take part. Although we've had more responses online, we did also hold public consultation meetings, and I would, through you, Chair, commend the staff who've been involved in this exercise. We know that the numbers of children with special educational needs are increasing. We know that the number of education healthcare plans are also increasing. What this does is to provide an opportunity for people to be educated close to home in their own neighbourhood, build up friendships and stay where they can best be educated.
Thank you, Ivan. Byron?
Yes, I agree with all that. But of course the question now is how do you pay for this? We've got a great many more children who qualify to be classed as having special educational needs and having, because they have an education, health and care plan. And the government, of course, quite rightly introduced that back in 2014. But then that increases the costs. And quite rightly, all this cost should be borne as part of the direct school grant. But the higher needs element of the direct school grant is insufficient, and we're having all sorts of difficulties. And coupled with the fact, of course, we don't have sufficient provision, as the directors just pointed out. However, we do have the programme in place which will address it, and we will get some capital assistance for one of the establishments, I know from the Department of Education, which is good. We need to keep up the pressure on the DFE to fund this better, and to make sure that none of this cost falls back into our mainstream revenue accounts. But at the moment, with all the actions we're taking, it looks as though we will work our way through the problem. So I think the Director and her team have done a very good job. I'm very happy to second the motion.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Byron. It is important if we can get the money off the government. We don't really want ratepayers to have to pay for it. Before we vote, can I also pass on my congratulations, Jane, to you and your staff for a job well done, and also, while I'm here, thank Ivan for the work that he does. So it's been moved by Ivan, seconded by Byron. Can I ask for a show of hands in favour, please? Thank you very much. I think the next one's for you, Jane, as well, isn't it? Supporting children in care and care leavers in Leicestershire, 49 to 88. It's about what I've just introduced, but one thing of particular note and worth highlighting is that we have agreed with all the district councils that anybody over up to the age of 25 will get 100% tax relief, which is very, very good, and I'm sure it'll help them. And I thank district colleagues as well for assenting to this. So, Jane, I didn't introduce you properly last time. You are the director, so people know, you're the Director of Children and Family Services, and you'll be presenting this report. Then I shall call Ivan. Jane.
Thank you. So this report sets out the new arrangements for supporting our care leavers in Leicestershire, including the development of the care leavers offer, the draft care leavers protocol, the care leavers covenant, and the promise to our children in care and care leavers. So as a corporate parent, the County Council has a collective responsibility to be a good parent to the children and young people in its care. And the Children Act 1989 requires that the County Council continue to provide various forms of advice, assistance and guidance to young people over the age of 18 in order to make the transition from care to more independent living arrangements. The Children Leaving Care Act 2000 also set out how the local authority's strategy for care leavers should, where possible, consider a range of issues around accommodation. So in paragraph 17, we've set out the requirement for local authorities to now deliver and provide support to care leavers up to the age of 25. And this includes those who return to the local authority requesting a personal advisor support after the age of 21 and therefore up to the age of 25. So the County Council does aim to support the majority of its children and young people within their own families and communities, and there are a range of preventive services in place to attempt to avoid children needing to be accommodated by the authority. There are currently 590 children in our care and 260 care leavers for whom we have responsibility. And the department has now developed a number of initiatives that set out the local authority's commitment to children in care and care leavers. The first of this is the promise. The promise is the commitment of the local authority and agencies such as the police, district, health and voluntary sector organisations that we've made to children in care and care leavers to work together to improve outcomes for them. And the promise also sets out our commitment to children in care and care leavers across a number of key areas. This promise was launched on the 1st of April this year. The second area is our care leavers offer and is a statutory requirement under the Children and Family Social Work Act to deliver an extended offer to young people up to the age of 25. And the offer sets out the Council and Partners commitment across a number of areas as set out in paragraph 25. Thirdly, the Care Leavers Covenant has been published in response to Keep On Caring, which is a policy document on support for young people from care to independence. And it does include a strategic pledge to introduce a Care Leavers Covenant. And this is a promise that's made by all private, public and voluntary sector organisations to provide support for care leavers to help them live independently. And as a part of this, we are developing our links with local businesses and partners in order to further development the work. The Covenant does encourage partners and private businesses to provide additional support to those leaving care, including setting out their specific offer for care leavers. And lastly, the draft care leavers protocol for housing. This is an agreement that sets out a formal agreement, between the county council and 7 districts, the Bridge, and also other partner agencies. So the protocol aims to establish the roles and responsibilities of all parties towards accommodation pathways for care leavers, and also sets out the offer to care leavers, in particular around ensuring most suitable accommodation is provided. Dialogue with the districts is ongoing, and we are hoping that the protocol will be signed up and launched in autumn this year. So there are 4 key parts to it around discharging our responsibilities, around addressing the diverse accommodation needs of our care leavers, identifying gaps in service provision, and also preventing our care leavers from becoming homeless, entering the homeless system, or avoiding the use of unsuitable accommodation, but also ensuring that across the partnership we have a range of good quality accommodation that will meet the needs of our care leavers. And as the leader indicated earlier, all district councils have now set out the agreement to exempt our care leavers from council tax up to the age of 25. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Ivan?
Thank you, Leader, and I move the motion on the Green Order paper. I attended the Promise when it was launched, which was a quite spectacular event. with all partners present signing up and making offers as to how they could help care leavers. It is clearly in society's best interest if people leaving the care system become independent people, able to earn their own living and raise their own families without recourse to further help. So it does, to a certain extent, what I'm now going to say, falls within the remit that Byron mentioned on the previous paper. You read in here that our responsibilities have been expanded by the Department for Education. Nothing wrong with that at all. The theory behind it is excellent. The outcome isn't, because that increase in responsibility has not been properly funded. So as with so many things these days, you are being held to account without the cash to actually implement it in the way that you would like. It's a good paper. I met one of our children in care apprentices the other day in the corridor. 18 months ago, we were concerned maybe they'd go in the wrong direction. I was held for 10 minutes with a young man basically just enthusing about the experience he's got within this council as a child in care apprentice, and that was really good. So no hesitation in moving this on the Green Order paper. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Ivan. Richard?
Sorry, I was so enthralled in Ivan's speech about the corridor conversation. I'm very happy to second, Joan.
Byron?
Yeah, when I read this paper and the associated appendices, I thought it was really wonderful. I mean, what we're doing for these youngsters is more than many parents would do for their own youngsters. And so it should be. I mean, if you take on the role of culprit parents, and we do, then we should do the job properly. So I'm delighted to support this paper.
Okay, I'm delighted to support it as well. The principles of the paper are entirely sound. Whether we get the correct amount of money or not, it's something we should do, and people leaving our care should be no worse off than if they were looked after by their parents or their adopted parents. That's the principle, I think, that they should be treated the same. And actually, if we can treat them slightly better and give them a bit of a hand by not charging them council tax, well, I think it's really good. So I've got no other speakers. All in favour? Thank you, Jane. Okay, so the next one's also yours, Jane. New multi-agency children's safeguarding arrangements. This is on pages 89 to 100. I'll let you do the introduction. Suffice to say, the arrangements were supported by the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee at its meeting on the 5th of March. So I'll let you introduce it, Jane, and then call Ivan.
Thank you. So the paper in front of you sets out the proposals for the new multi-agency safeguarding arrangements for children that are now required by the Children and Family Social Work Act 2017 and also set out in Working Together 2018. And these new arrangements will replace our current Leicestershire and Rutland Local Safeguarding Children's Board to be in place by September 2019. So the local safeguarding children's boards were established in 2004, and they gave the statutory responsibility to each locality to have this mechanism in place. As explained, the Working Together guidance now covers the legislative arrangements and requirements placed on individual services that set out a framework for local partners to work together to safeguard and promote the welfare of children. So the safeguarding partners in the purpose of this are defined as the local authority chief exec, the accountable officer of the clinical commissioning groups, and the chief officer of police for that area. And the safeguarding partners need to set out how they will work together locally and with relevant agencies to safeguard children. The DFE requires that these arrangements are published by the end of June and in place by the end of September. So we've detailed in paragraphs 17 to 20 how the current arrangements work around safeguarding, and from 21 onwards set out the proposals for the new arrangements. So lead officers from each of the agencies across Leicestershire have met to develop new arrangements, and we've worked alongside and with advice from the current chair of the Safeguarding Board. So the new arrangements will be underpinned by a number of key principles, including how organisations work together to seek assurance for safeguarding, share information and learning, and also how we will have strong accountability and governance. So it's proposed that the new arrangements will cover the locality areas of Leicestershire and Rutland, and the safeguarding partners being Leicestershire County Council, Rutland County Council, the East Leicestershire and Rutland CCG, the West Leicestershire CCG and Leicestershire Police. Leicester City will have separate safeguarding arrangements, but the partnerships will be supported by a number of joint groups. So we've set out the proposed structure in paragraphs 30, and the structure will be led by a new Leicestershire and Rutland Safeguarding Children's Partnership, which will consist of director-led level representatives from the 5 statutory safeguarding partnership organisations and supported by the Planning and Delivery Group. And then we've detailed the arrangements for the subgroups of the Planning and Delivery Group, which will include a Young People's Advisory Group, Policy and Procedures Group, Multi-Agency Learning and Development, Case Review Group, Child Death Review Panel and a Multi-Agency Group. So the partnership will receive assurance from the statutory partners and seek assurance of safeguarding arrangements from a range of named relevant partners, which will include our district councils, the early years settings in schools, voluntary and community sector health providers, private sector children's services, including children's homes. And we've set out the framework for safeguarding assurance at the top of page 98 of your documents. So working together also requires the statutory safeguarding partners to set out the threshold document, of which we've done, and that's already published on the local Safeguarding Children's Board website. And we've also set out how the new partnership will have key links with a number of, and seek assurance from a number of partnership boards as well. And then finally, the published arrangements will include plans for independent scrutiny. The guidance does require us to ensure that the scrutiny is objective, acts as constructive, critical friend, and promotes reflection to drive continuous improvement. So from September 2019, the new arrangements do propose that the current chair takes on or is adapted to become the independent advisor, which will include independent scrutiny. The lead member for Children's Services in local authority does hold key political accountability for ensuring that the needs of all children and young people are addressed. So the lead members for Children's Services across Leicestershire and Rutland will therefore be in attendance of the new safeguarding partnerships, as in the former arrangements, in a participant observer role to maintain their independence as well. There is a requirement for the partnership to publish a report every 12 months, and this will set out what's been done by the partnership to safeguard children during the previous year, and also how this partnership arrangement is scrutinised. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Ivan?
Yeah, I'm happy to support the motion on the Green Order paper. Clearly, if you are a lead member, this is a critical area that you get held accountable for. So I shall watch to see how the new partnership arrangements evolve and develop, because I'm very conscious of the fact that I don't want a child out there to be abused if there's anything that we can do to prevent it.
Very good, Ivan. Lee?
Thank you, Leader. I think as you introduced the paper, it was good to see that the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee was supportive of the new arrangements, and I think key will be scrutiny going forward, so happy to second.
Thank you. No other speakers. Moved by Ivan, seconded by Lee. All in favour? Thank you, Jane. Agenda item 7, agreement with Leicester City Council to delegate certain functions under the Care and Mental Health Act outside of office hours. This is on pages 101 to 104. It's pretty much what it says in the introduction. So John Wilson, the Director of Adults and Communities, will present this report, and then Richard Blunt will speak as he's the Cabinet lead. John?
Thank you. So yes, as the report requests, the local authority has statutory duties under Section 42 of the Care Act and Section 13 of the Mental Health Act for assessment and to make arrangements for people who are subject to safeguarding inquiries and mental health assessments respectively. They're duties that require the Council to be able to provide those services 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. But given the relatively low volumes of demand for the services on an urgent basis out of office hours and the relative high cost of provision, it's fairly commonplace for local authorities to provide the services jointly across local authority boundaries. And indeed that has been the case in Leicestershire for over 20 years following local government reorganisation, when Leicester City Council agreed to take on the duties as part of their emergency duty team function. Should Cabinet agree the delegation today, a report will be provided to the Leicester City Council to accept the delegation, following which legal services will drop a contract across the two authorities for the provision of services. Thank you.
Rich?
It says on the reasons for recommendation that it's sensible and cost effective, and that is why I'm happy to move the recommendations on the bottom of page 2 of the Green Order paper and the top of page 3.
Lee?
Thank you, Leader. It was good to see the new agreement accurately reflects the functions to be provided, so more than happy to second as per the Green Order paper.
Excellent. Moved by Richard, seconded by Lee. All in favour? Thank you, John. Next one, supporting growth in Leicestershire 105 to 116. This report seeks Cabinet support for proposals to address the financial challenges faced by the Council arising from significant housing and business growth planned across Leicestershire and the infrastructure required to support this. It's worth noting that the Leicester's population is predicted to grow by 16% over the next 20 years. This is actually quantum growth, and it needs a quantum change in how we address development. And out of that 16%, 11% will be older people and 5% will be younger people. So we need to be really, really proactive in, in responding to developments, ensuring we get the roads, the community and the community facilities in the right place at the right time. And when you talk about infrastructure, we're not just talking about roads and schools and that. We need green infrastructure, we need community infrastructure. It's not just about tarmac and concrete. There's a whole paraphernalia of stuff which people need and expect when they move into these new developments. So we need to establish this growth unit. It's going to help us plan ahead for Leicestershire's future by strengthening internal coordination and management and securing external funding, along with agreeing cost-sharing arrangements with districts will mean growth can be delivered at speed and in partnership across Leicestershire. And in my view, it will help districts because some of them, Charnwood's a big one, but we've got some little ones, and in some areas they just haven't got the officer corps to deal with some of these mega developments and mega developers who are, if we're not careful, hold us all to ransom. And we do need to ensure we do get the money off them that they rightfully need to spend to make sure that the growth is mitigated and it made acceptable to the rest of us who are already here. So I think a growth unit is absolutely essential to deal with a 16% growth. I know we've managed so far, and we read yesterday that we got 14 million from the government for some roads, but if you look at the numbers, we've got to find another 600 million over the next 25 years. So we need a coordinated growth unit sitting underneath the chief, up in the chief exec's department, which can drive the mitigation which we require. So Simon Lawrence is the major projects manager. He's going to present the report. Then I'm going to call Byron.
Thank you, Leader. So by way of introduction, perhaps repeat some of the important points you've just made in your introduction. The population of Leicestershire is projected to grow by 16% in the next 20 years, a population that reflects an ageing population as well as an increasing need for single occupancy homes. And the scale of that challenge is unprecedented, as you say, Leader. And to support such a dramatic level of population growth, there is a need to build nearly 200,000 new homes by 2050 across the city and the county, and this is set out in the Leicester and Leicestershire Strategic Growth Plan. So the purpose of this report is to advise the Cabinet of the financial challenges faced by the County Council arising from the significant housing and business growth planned across Leicestershire and the infrastructure required to support these. And the report goes on to recommend proactive steps to address these whilst maintaining a commitment to supporting sustainable growth in the county. The link between growth and the need for infrastructure is well established, with new roads, schools, community facilities, etc., as well as other infrastructure led by separate parts of the public sector being required. And again, as you said earlier, Leader, the delivery costs for roads and schools, etc., over the next 25 years is estimated to be in the region of £600 million. And of course, this comes at a time where the County Council is facing significant financial challenges. So the report sets out a number of recommendations that reflect the County Council's commitment to supporting the delivery of sustainable growth in the short, medium and long term, supporting communities as well as reflecting these substantial challenges. The report recommends the need to give consideration to entering into the cost-sharing arrangements with district councils to help offset the financial risks faced by the County Council in developing the infrastructure necessary and to support growth in the county. And these are often upfront costs, well in advance of receiving development contributions from developers. The cost-sharing arrangement would be based on ensuring additional tax revenues generated from the consequential housing and economic growth in the area are utilised to support the forward funding of schemes and to cover any potential ongoing funding shortfall. And in addition, the developer contributions from the proposed developments should be maximised and secured as early in the development as possible. The report also then recommends the establishment of the growth unit at the County Council to ensure that the growth is effectively planned and delivered across the Leicestershire, that risks associated with the Council's financial contribution to large-scale growth and infrastructure projects remain tightly managed, and that the Council helps to secure the maximum level of developer contribution for schemes in the county. The recommendations are as set out on the Green Order paper.
I forgot to mention before I call Byron, we need to note the comments received from David Bell on behalf of the Liberal Democrat group. Okay, Byron.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Well, very comprehensive introduction by yourself and also by Mr. Lawrence. Just something to add to that. There's huge amounts of money needed in future years to cope with the expansion of Leicestershire, the expansion of the number of people who live here, and the expansion of the economic activity that will be required to sustain future populations as well, and the infrastructure that will be required. In the not too distant past, governments used to allow us to fund big investments like this by supported borrowing. They would we'd go out and borrow large sums of money, and they would guarantee the interest payments on it in the money. So that all disappeared, which is why we went to the next paper. We currently have a huge amount of debt hanging over us from previous years, which we have to sustain. So we don't have that anymore. If we go out and borrow, we've got to find the interest. So the other way to get money is from grants from the government. But grants from the government are not on the basis of, well, you've got a project, we'll give you a grant towards it, just like that. They make us bid for it. And of course, there's never quite enough money to go around for all these bids because they're oversubscribed. But of course, this being Leicestershire, we succeed on most of our bids because we put a better case up than other people, and which is why we've got, for example, such a significant sum of money towards the Melton North Distributor Road, which is presently in the news, and planning permission was granted for it yesterday, and we're hoping to get further sums of money for other projects as well. But looking at the whole thing of 600 million is an awful lot to fund. Now, the other source of money is from the developers themselves, and charges on the properties they build and new houses they build, which are subsequently paid by the purchasers, but in fact effectively indirectly fall back to meaning that the developers pay less for the land from the landowners than they previously did. So that is gradually coming in, but the mechanisms for guaranteeing that money and for first of all agreeing how much do have some imperfections, and we have some concerns about whether we'll get sufficient of those, what are called Section 106 contributions, plus grants to be able to cover the full costs. Hence the need to manage all this very, very carefully with this growth unit within the Chief Executive's Department, which I fully support, which is now going to be put in being, something I don't think any other county has done, not that I'm aware of anyway. And it will mean then that as developments take place and as expansion takes place over the years, not only will we talk about doing things, we'll actually make it happen. Because governments and local government often criticised for having grand ideas, but actually then failing to actually produce the investment in the end and actually make a success of it. We all know what governments are like, for example, with HS2 and the talk of it being massively overspent, and other projects, of course, have got a history of this as well. So The growth unit will be there to make sure we keep our feet on the ground and keep control of the costs, and also make sure that we are bringing in sufficient money when we need it in order to be able to fund the developments. So the motion which is on the Green Order paper, which is set out under item 8, is designed to put in place all the powers to make all this happen. And there's one other piece as well, which I think I ought to mention. There is a possibility, of course, that you don't collect enough Section 106 contribution, or you don't get sufficient grant. And then, of course, the cost then, you don't do the job, or it falls back onto the county council. And the county council doesn't have sufficient money anyway for its capital programme. So something has to sort of pick up the slack, as it were. Well, when you build new houses, you get more council tax. And of course, quite a lot of that's needed to pay for current services. But some of it now, we're talking to the districts, in particular to Melton at the moment, about setting aside some of that into a pot, which basically could bridge the gap if we have shortfalls on some of these projects. And into that pot could go some new homes bonus, should that survive the spending review, and some business rate growth as well. So this whole motion is designed to do all of these things. It's a grand motion, and it's an aspirational approach to tackling these problems. So I move it now.
Great. Blake.
Thank you, Leader. I'm not sure what else I can add. It's been very comprehensively explained by the lead member for Finance. What I will say is I welcome the approach that the County Council is taking towards delivering future infrastructure in Leicestershire. I speak as a former leader of a borough district council, and there are a number of larger developments that once they were permitted, the terms of those developments altered because land values changed, or the developers took a different interest, or new developers came in. And I think it's important that at the front end of any development or any major development that we lock down those terms so we can actually deliver for Leicestershire people and the whole of Leicestershire. I speak as lead member for the Environment and Transport Department, and the report very clearly gives a lot of strategic evidence as to why this particular approach is needed. We're talking about £400 million worth of highways and transport infrastructure in the next 25 years. It will possibly grow, and at the moment we have a number of projects that we have to bid competitively for, and that is a problem in itself. But it costs money to put the advanced design schemes together and the business cases together, and sometimes those bids don't come to fruition. They're not successful. So that means we're spending local money, local county council money, and putting these bids together, and it could range between 400,000 to, in the Melton Mowbray Distributor Roads example, £4 million worth of money was spent putting that bid together. So clearly we need a new approach to be able to deliver the infrastructure that Leicestershire needs in the future. And I firmly believe that this is progressive, and it will go some way into identifying some of the issues we've learnt from by experience and mitigating those challenges in the future. So on that basis, Leader, I fully support and second the motion. Thank you.
Sure, that's good. Well, we've no other speakers, so it's moved by Ivan, seconded by Blake. All in Byron, sorry, got my I's and V's mixed up. All in favour? Thank you, Simon. Medium-term financial strategy 2021 to 23-24. Proposals for consultation. These are set out on 117 to 124. This report seeks approval for a proposed approach to widespread public, stakeholder and staff consultation on the future financial priorities. We've not run this for a long time, so I think it's really important we get to speak to as many people as we humanly can. Obviously, the Council's made huge changes in the way it works since austerity. It's affected local authorities across the country, and our recognition of the climate change emergency will affect everything we do. But in my view, we need to bear in mind climate change. We need not only to be seen to be green, we need to be a green conservative administration. So when we look at the things we do, a lot of them are statutory and we can't do much with them, but if we always bear in mind we have recognised the climate change emergency, we don't just want to be seen to be green, we do actually want to be a green Conservative administration. So it's going to be difficult, but we'll see what people say. So Chris Tambini, the Director of Corporate Resources, will present the report. He's joined by Declan. And then again, I'll ask Byron to speak first. So are you doing it, Chris? Or okay, over to you, Chris.
Thank you. As Cabinet know, we do consult annually with both the residents and with business on our budget. But we also every few years do a very thorough, detailed consultation to find out what residents really think about our services in detail. And this includes questions to identify which services they value the most, and also questions on areas such as council tax. We generally have done this through a detailed survey and also through focus groups. And this report seeks approval to undertake such a detailed consultation. Just picking up on the comments from the leader, we will be including some questions around climate change as well within the questionnaire. The results will be used to inform the next MTFS, and the timetables are attached with an appendix to the report. I suppose the final thing I'd say is, I haven't mentioned it so far, is it will take place within a continuing challenging financial outlook. I think the position will continue to be pretty tough for the public sector over the medium term, and that will be the backdrop in which the survey is completed. The recommendations are on the Green Order paper.
Thank you, Chris. Byron?
Yes, thank you, Leader. I think Mr Tambini's given a good introduction to this. It is time we did this comprehensive consultation, although, as you said, we do consult every year, but this is a much more in-depth one. Towards the end of June and in July, I shall be going through the budgets and progress on this year's programmes and costs with directors through the Star Chamber process. It's the first step towards drawing up the budgets for next year and the refresh of the MTFS. So that will be fresh in the mind when we're doing this consultation work as well, and will also feed into the process. It's important that we share with the public and get this greater understanding across to them of just what we're facing, because we're not out of the woods yet. We still have quite considerable savings to make, as our current MTFS indicates, unless of course there's a big change in the Chancellor's approach to funding local government as a result of the spending assessment which is coming, and the fair funding changes which are coming, and the business rates retention which is coming, but they're not quite here yet, and they're supposed to be implemented towards the end of this year, but probably not going to be until the following year. And so great uncertainty on the national scene. It's important we keep our feet on the ground here and know what we're doing, and keep the public with us and listen to what the public say to us. So I move the motion under item 9 A and B.
Thank you, Byron. Richard Shepherd?
Thank you. I second that, and I particularly noticed the words, I think, sharing and understanding with the public that the lead member used. In the end, responsibility for decisions will be ours as councillors. But as the lead member says, this is an opportunity to share with the public, frankly, some of the realities that we face on behalf of all of us in the county. Some things we have to do by law. We want to do everything that we do well, obviously, but there are still those severe constraints on finance. So I do hope there will be a big response to the consultation. It is a chance for us to open this up to the public and say, here's some of the reality. What do you think? I'm pleased to second it, Chairman.
Thank you, Richard. Blake?
Thank you, Leader. I just want to pick up on the point you made, the preamble you made in the introduction to the report about the environment strategy. there are significant challenges with the MTFS going forward, and I think that's just been picked up by Byron. But I wouldn't want the most recent consultation and the strategy to cloud the fact that we've delivered some really, really good stuff here. In the last 4 years alone, let's just take the environment strategy. We perhaps haven't shouted enough about it. We'll probably resource £30 million worth of initiatives through the street lighting, through the solar panels on the county property, through the ash dieback scheme where we set £5 million aside to deal with ash dieback and plant new trees. We perhaps haven't shouted enough about this, but we are serious about the environment, and I'm pleased to see that that will form part of the consultation. But let's not forget the great work we're doing in spite of the financial challenges to try and change the carbon and the greenhouse emissions that we're responsible for here at County Hall.
Sure, but being green will cost. So if people in the consultation want us to be greener, which I think they probably will, it will cost money. But I think ultimately we're going to have to do our best with everything. A, we've only got one planet. B, we're the leaders in Leicestershire. So we should. I know we've done a lot of good work, but we shouldn't just talk green. We do really have to be green moving forward. And at least if you say to me we can't afford it, at least we can say these are the costings that we've got to make the quantum leap to reduce carbon emissions and stuff. So I do hope the public do reply in that vein so we can look at it, because I think there is a great will out there for us in the UK to show the world what should be done. I mean, I know China pumps out more carbon than we pump out in 10 years in one day, but that doesn't mean they're right. So it has been moved and seconded moved by Ivan and seconded by Richard. So can I ask for a show of hands in favour? Thank you. Yes, got it the wrong way around again. It was moved by Byron and seconded by Richard. Sorry about that. Okay, some more mundane stuff now. Well, it is if you get it right. Anyway, the annual Treasury Management Report, 1819, 125 to 130. Declan, you'll be doing this. Declan's the Assistant Director of Corporate Resources. I will then call Byron and followed by Richard. And we need to note this was considered by the Corporate Governance Committee at its meeting on May the 10th. Declan.
Thank you, Leader. The report basically just summarises our lending and borrowing activity over the last financial year, and it's presented here just to comply with SIPFA's Code of Practice. And like you say, boring is good with this sort of topic. So, I mean, and I can sort of report that back. There's been no policy breaches to report in either the borrowing or the lending side. When we look back over the year, borrowing activity has been minimal. We've repaid £500,000 worth of debt, and we just haven't had any further opportunities to repay debt, just due to sort of the low interest rates at the moment, and we've got no need for new borrowing. This does very much buck the trend in local government where debt levels are continuing to rise. And if you look back at our peak in 2012, the council's financing requirement is reduced by £140 million, and that means we've got £6 million more each year that we can spend on services. So it is a good news story in amongst it. Investments also show that we've got a good strong balance sheet. We've got an average balance of 248 million of cash last year. And the rates that we've been earning on that cash does compare well to the local government benchmarks. Although it should be noted, interest does remain low due to, again, to the Bank of England base rates being at such a low level. We have used sort of property and private debt investments that have been enabled by a strong balance sheet, and they are starting to deliver sort of superior returns to where we've been getting from the historic sources. So in summary, it's been a quiet but a good year.
As you said, Declan, boring is good. And you're a member of SEPFA, aren't you? Okay, Byron.
Well, I'm not sure borrowing is good.
No, boring is good.
Oh, boring is good. I misheard you.
Yeah.
Paragraph 21 is the important thing. I mean, we haven't taken out any external loans since August 2010. I don't think there's any other council in the country can say that. And in fact, we've repaid money since that time. But you still have a debt portfolio that hangs over as 264 million from previous times, which is a significant sum. It costs us nearly £16 million a year in interest, which we could, if we didn't have that, which would be used towards providing services. So borrowing has consequences. At the moment, with interest rates low, the consequences are fairly small, but in the future, if you start to drift down that road, the interest rates may rise. That is the direction of travel now. It would cost more. I keep a very close eye on the Treasury work, as you might expect me to, and it's part of my portfolio. But I would like to pay particular tribute to the Corporate Governance Committee, who also do that work for us as well. And it's in cooperation with them that we're able to maintain controls and to maintain the comfort knowing that we've got everything under control. And I can also say that we don't make any loans to local authorities these days, since we have that ill-informed criticism over the Northamptonshire loan, which of course was repaid on time and with full interest, as it always would have been. And it's not to the credit of anybody who criticised that at the time. But nevertheless, we don't lend out to local authorities anymore. So it's an area of activity which is under control. While I'm still here, I'll do my best. Well, I'll guarantee you, because it's part of something I've got to do, that it will stay that way. I have no worries about it because I've got such a good team who are looking after things. So I move that the report be noted, which is what the motion says on the order paper.
Thank you. Richard?
Thank you. Yes, so boring is good, unnews is good news. But I would like to pick up on the point about that Declan made, which also made what Blake made. Let's not actually overlook the good news that we have, while at the same time being clear with the public about things that are concerning. There's an important, I think, balancing act there in accurate communication. I'm seconding, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. All in favour? Thank you, Declan. 11, 18-19 Provisional Revenue and Capital Outturn 131 to 168. Scrutiny Commission will consider this report on the 12th of June. And it says here, Chris, that you're doing this.
Thank you, and I suppose this continues the theme, boring is good. Last year in 18-19, we continued to control expenditure very effectively, actually in pretty tough circumstances. And I think credit must go to lead members, officers in department, and of course the finance function. Before additional commitments, the council actually underspent by just under £10 million, and this split across most service departments, with the largest underspend in the largest department, which is adults and communities. As has been the case in previous years, the key pressures continue to be in children's services, and just a little bit more on those pressures. I mean, we mentioned high needs block at an earlier report on this agenda, but the high needs block actually overspent by £4 million last year. And this was offset by a range of kind of one-off measures, including a one-off grant that came in kind of later in the year. We do anticipate that in the short term, this pressure will continue and will grow, so we're expecting a higher overspend this current year. In terms of the local authority children and families budget, again, there was a small overspend of about £500,000, and this really reflects the continuing pressures within children's social care, which are remaining there, but hopefully that they will be contained over the coming year. The additional commitments of £8.9 million are detailed in paragraph 51. And it's worth noting that a lot of these relate to capital. And again, in the earlier report, talked about £600 million kind of pressures on capital over the kind of longer term. But in the short term, some of the key pressures identified in the report are things like repair and damage to heat damage roads, and extra funding for the future developments pot. And once they're taken into account, the council actually shows a small net underspend of just about £1 million. Before I kind of refer to the recommendations, just going back to the earlier conversation in terms of green issues. And I suppose historically, and I think in the future, there is quite an alignment with green issues and finance, because generally you do get financial savings. So some of the biggest savings we've had over the last kind of 5 or 10 years are around street lighting, turning them to LED, again, carbon savings and financial savings. And we're also looking at things like, income generation from solar farms. So again, I think there is quite a degree of alignment, though I do expect there will be some additional costs kind of coming our way. The recommendations are set out on the green order paper.
Very good, Chris. Thanks for that extra information. Byron?
Yes, I mean, it's reflecting a good year, and the fact that we're able to control the expenditure, bring it inside the total envelope of what we'd allowed. And indeed, we had some underspends in some areas, which enabled us to deal with other priorities which emerged during the year and give us a net figure which is only a drift by 1 million, but it's a £1 million underspend, which is good. we've been able to do this in previous years as well, and I hope that we'll continue to be able to manage quite as well. And it's a great tribute to I think the business partners who work within resources and of course link very closely to to each of the directorates, that they do keep control over expenditure and advise the directors accordingly, so that they take the appropriate measures to deal with any unforeseen problems during the year. So I think we've got a good model for control, and it's been proven by this report that it works. So I move the motion on the Green Order paper under item 11.
Thank you. Richard?
Thank you, Chairman. I second that, and I agree with the remarks made by the lead member and by Chris Tambini.
Thank you. I mean, the only worrying area really is children's services in particular. But I mean, where we've got children coming into our care, there's nothing else we can do except pay, pretty much. And Ivan tells me we haven't got thousands, but the ones we've got are very, very expensive in certain cases. So it's difficult, but we just have to bite the bullet and fund it. Okay, moved by Byron, seconded by Richard. All in favour? Thank you, Chris. Zouch Bridge replacement. Well, we all know where it is. Is Anne here? Yes, Anne's going to talk about it. Anne's the Director of the Environment and Transport. I'm then going to call Blake.
Thank you, Leader. In 2013, the County Council recognised that due to the ageing condition of Zouch Bridge, we needed to replace it. At that time, well, just following that in 2014, £3 million capital allocation was made towards that. Since that time, we've undergone the planning process, we've had to go through the full CPO process and substantial redesign of the bridge as well due to flooding requirements. And that's led us to only now being able to be in a position to construct it. However, our latest cost estimate on the bridge is at 9.3 million. While we expect that to come down because we are just at the early contractor involvement stage, so that's quite early in getting the contractor on board and finalising what's going to be built on the ground. The report seeks an additional 5.5 million in order to fund that construction. The reasons for the cost escalation are set out in paragraphs 33 to 58 of your report in front of you, but the key factors are substantially a more complex design due to flooding requirements, which increased the span of the bridge, doubled the amount of steel. We had to also widen the bridge itself, as well as factors such as increasing statutory undertakers' costs, going through the full CPO and planning, as well as inflation over that time. Given this overall cost, we did actually look at different strategies to deal with the condition of the bridge, and these are set out in the tables on page 178 and 179 of your report, along with the pros and cons. They included a potential weight restriction or ongoing reactive maintenance. Overall, in assessing those, however, in order to minimise the traffic disruption on that east-west route and avoid considerable abortive cost in the short to medium term, the report recommends that we do actually go for that full reconstruction. Those recommendations are set out for you in full in the order paper under item 12. Thank you.
Great. One thing that I know the answer, but just for the record, people ask me, why do we pay for a bridge that's in Nottinghamshire?
It's actually right on the border. The border will be the river itself, and we have historically had agreements with our neighbouring counties, highway authorities, of we'll maintain one bridge, they'll maintain the other bridge, etc. And it just so happens Zouch is our responsibility.
Kind of unlucky, but there you go. Over to you, Blake.
Thank you, Leader. This is another example where I suppose an unexpected cost pressure is placed upon the department to the tune of multi-millions of pounds, which, to be honest, we weren't expecting the cost to come in at that after the process it's been identified in the report has been through. But nonetheless, it is an issue that needs dealing with. I think Anne's just explained why it is that the cost of this particular bridge falls upon Leicestershire to deal with. But whilst the costs have increased over the last 6 years, we need to be clear that the A6 to treble 006 is a key east-west route across the county that provides a vital function, not least for businesses. We did consider alternative options in dealing with this issue, for instance, putting a weight restriction restriction, but that would not be appropriate. Traffic would have to divert to either the A52 south of Nottingham or the A46 north of Leicester, the shortage of which is a 28-mile diversion, so clearly that's not appropriate. And obviously, in terms of the finances, I don't think it's appropriate to continue to spend on reactive repairs to the tunes of hundreds of thousands of pounds each year. So we're left with very little option but to propose a replacement bridge. And with that in mind, I will propose item 12 on the Green Order paper, Leader. Thanks.
Thank you. I've got Richard. I think one of the bits of good news for people that live out there, so I represent Longwatt and Trevor here represents Kegworth, it's being built offline, so there's no closures. Is that right, Anne?
Absolutely, you're correct. It's been built parallel to the existing structure. Therefore, that building can go on. Existing traffic uses the existing bridge, and it's only when we come to tie in the finished structure to the existing roadway on either side of that existing bridge will there be any kind of disruption. But that means we absolutely minimise disruption for traffic in the interim while we're constructing the new structure.
Thanks for that clarification, Anne. I've got Rich rather than Richard.
Thanks, Chairman. I think it's a very pragmatic, sensible solution, and I'm glad I got the answer for the bridge being owned by two councils. Just to test Anne and Blake, roughly how many bridges do we have responsible for? Because obviously we cross rivers all over the place. Do we know roughly how many bridges, and do we know many more coming down the line that are likely to need serious replacement in the next 5 years?
Here is the asset management test, isn't it? It's in the order. I can't give you an exact figure, but it's several hundred, and I think around about 300 bridges and structures. Obviously, that goes from fairly small scale, unclassified road, etc., to the more substantial ones. We don't have any major reconstructions in the next few, as in the same scale of Zoch, complete reconstruction coming up in the next MTFS period at all. We have regular inspection programmes which are identifying works all the time, and you will be aware, no doubt, on the E50. Wittick, the bridge over there, just as you come off the junction 22, we've done major works there, several hundreds, thousands of pounds, but nothing really coming down the line yet at the moment on the scale of Zoch of full reconstruction in the short term.
Very good, Anne. Know your bridges. Byron?
Yeah, I think I just have to comment on the fact that we've got to approve another 5.5 million more than we previously got in the budget for this, because now that we realise it's going to cost more, because it needs to be a better bridge than was previously, I think, thought necessary. It's additional pressure on our capital programme, which is already underfunded by 58 million, and more and more reason why we need more money from the government, and because if this was central London, there'd be no problem. But because it's Leicestershire, we're having to work out how to cope. Anyway, we shall cope.
I thought you were going to say it was a bridge too far then, I'll formally second. We've no more speakers. I think everybody's spoken. All in favour? Thank you. Thank you, Anne. 13, enforcement programme for underage sales of tobacco products, nicotine products and aerosol paint products, 19 to 20, 191 to 198. It's approval of the enforcement programmes. Gary comes here every year with this. Gary's the head of regulatory services. Gary's actually in my portfolio, so Gary, you speak and then I will.
Thank you, Leader. This is an annual report to Cabinet to ensure the County Council meets its statutory obligations under legislation outlined in the paragraph 3 of the report. Essentially, this legislation requires Cabinet to approve an enforcement programme relating to the underage sales of tobacco, nicotine and aerosol paint products, and these are set out in appendices A and B. There is no requirement to set a programme for alcohol, albeit the service does undertake investigations into this area. The Trading Standards Service enforces a wide range of legislation that creates a criminal offence to supply tobacco products to children, and offences that prohibit products from being on display, and those products that are sold must contain the statutory health warnings. Paragraph 17 provides an indication of the level of enforcement activity in 2018-19. The illegal supply of illicit and counterfeit tobacco products continues to be the focus of our enforcement activities, because these under-the-counter sales threaten legitimate businesses and offer a cheap, unregulated alternative method for supply to adults and, regrettably, also children. The illegal tobacco share of the market is significant. It's estimated to around 35 to 40% of the market. Over the last year, covert test purchases initiated by the Trading Standards Service led to the seizure of over 10,000 illicit products, and criminal proceedings have been initiated relating to 13 defendants this year. It's not unusual for the service to execute warrants, seize goods from high street convenience stores, only to return to the same premises to find these products are still being offered under the counter with someone else claiming to be the owner of the business. Without doubt, children are able to access these products. Referring quickly to the aerosol paint products, the legislation requires trading standards to maintain a dialogue with the district councils as a method to identify any potential hotspots relating to the retail sales of aerosols. There were no specific problem traders identified by the districts this year. Clearly, the online marketplace tends to be the source now of these products. That graffiti that you will see in the towns, it's more likely these products will be accessed online. Recommendations are outlined on the Green Order paper.
The 35% figure of illicit is really quite frightening. I mean, you think normal cigarettes are bad enough for you, but this other stuff, it's just sweepings up and any old junk's put in them, isn't it, Gary?
That's correct, Chair. Yeah, it is a fairly constant battle, and of course, in terms of the economic well-being of Leicestershire, you know, these products are available on the high street, so it does undermine legitimate, honest businesses. So it is something we do work in partnership with HMRC when we can, but of course our focus is on the local community, the health agenda, rather than the tax issue. So it is a constant battle.
Thanks, Gary. I'll formally move. Lee?
Yeah, welcome this programme, Leader. It is vital that we protect our children and adults from the health issues associated with these products. Just one question. Did presumably underage sales of knives come under a different legislation and act?
Yes, there is legislation that controls the sale of knives. Of course, that's quite an interesting area at the minute. The police do tend to lead on it. Trading Standards will enforce it, and we will work in partnership with them, particularly in relation to the online market. Nationally, Trading Standards are doing quite a bit of work around that area, and there has been specific funding set aside by the Home Office. None of it's reached Leicestershire because they're dealing mainly with the cities where Trading Standards are involved. But yes, we are involved with that, but it is very much in partnership with the constabulary.
Okay, moved by me, seconded by Lee. All in favour? Thank you. 14, another one for Gary. Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000 and the Investigatory Powers Act 2016. This is a review of the policy statements on pages 199 to 208. I'll let you introduce it, Gary, but it was considered by Corporate Governance Committee on May the 10th, and it is recommended we approve the revised policy statement. So over to you, Gary.
Thank you, Leader. The review of the policy statement by Cabinet was actually deferred due to expected changes in the legislation, primarily relating to what we call communications data. This report has been prepared with the expectation that all the commencement orders for the primary and secondary legislative changes will be in place by the end of this month. To date, we do wait on Parliament, but I invite Cabinet to make recommendations on the basis that the revised policy will not take effect until legislative amendments are enacted. Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, more often referred to as RIPA, deals with surveillance. The codes of practice made under RIPA require elected members to review the authority's use of RIPA to ensure it is fit for purpose, in particular the policy. In a local authority context, the Trading Standards Service is the primary user of RIPA, and all authorised surveillance activities must be concerned with the prevention and detection of crime. A local authority must have in place an authorisation process to ensure any covert surveillance is lawful, necessary and proportionate. There is also an additional layer of approval as it applies to local authorities, which is judicial approval, currently through the Magistrates' Court. Essentially, the changes requiring an amendment to the policy relates to one type of covert surveillance, and that's access to communications data, and those references are in paragraph 16. Essentially, communications data is the who, what, when, and where of a communication. For example, a call made, letter sent, email, etc. It does not include the content of a communication, and a local authority is not permitted to access that level. In paragraph 23 refers to the actual use of RIPA, and you'll see that there is minimum activity in terms of the number of authorisations, again, mainly trading standards investigations. Currently, an authorisation for any form of surveillance goes through a two-stage process, internally and then approved by a magistrate's court. This will now change for communications data. Internal authorisation will remain, but in place of the Magistrates' Court for communications data, a grant of approval will be issued by the new Office of Communications Data Authorisations. Other changes relate to the requirement to meet a serious crime threshold for certain types of data, and paragraph 19 refers to that. There is a mandatory requirement to only seek data from communication service providers via a national anti-fraud network, which is actually hosted by Tameside Metropolitan Borough Council. The policy and legislative requirements that the Council only undertakes will only relate to surveillance activities in appropriate circumstances where it's necessary, lawful, and more importantly, where there is no other less intrusive means in which to detect that criminality. I recommend the approval of the policy as indicated on the order paper.
I agree with you, Gary. I'll move it. Lee?
Seconded.
All in favour? Thank you, Gary. And can I congratulate you on your good work down there with a small team. Thank you very much, Gary.
Thank you, Leader.
15 items referred from over in scrutiny, there are none. 16 any other items, there are none. That concludes the meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance.